Act up, fight back, fight AIDS. Act up, fight back, fight AIDS. I contracted HIV before the discovery of the HIV virus.
My name is Eric Sawyer. I'm 63 years old. I grew up in upstate New York in basically farm country. My father was a truck driver and my mother a stay-at-home housewife. They were relatively conservative. This is me here. I was quite shy as a young, as a young kid. I think that was largely because I felt different. It wasn't until graduate school that I really came out. That's me on the wrestling. We really were at just the very beginning of the LGBT rights movement.
They've rejected men in that sense.
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer.
As time passed on, more and more people became symptomatic with these illnesses and dying, very rapid, pretty painful and horribly disfiguring deaths. No one knew the cause of the illness, no one knew how to prevent getting it. Pretty much everyone who got sick from it was dying in 6 to 12 months.
AIDS was once found only among sexually active gay men, but not anymore.
This is Scott here. He died when he was 32.
First person that I knew really well who came down with full-blown AIDS was my boyfriend. His name was Scott Bernard, and he came down with Kaposi sarcoma in the fall of 1984. The level of stigma and discrimination that people with AIDS faced at that time, especially people who were visibly infected and symptomatic, was really horrible. There were a number of incidents for when my boyfriend and I would enter a subway car and here he was, no hair, looked like a skeleton, covered with these purple callus-like lesions, and people would literally part away from us. We went into a restaurant one time and he sat down and he drank some of the water, and the waitress came over, instead of taking our order, was carrying a garbage can and picked up his glass of water and threw it in the garbage can and wiped all of the silverware into the garbage can and started yelling, "Get out, get out! We don't serve disease faggots in this place." I was really, really upset that I couldn't do anything to help save his life. Our first demonstration was on Wall Street in 1987 in March. The activist movement was really birthed then and kind of exploded because there were so many dying of AIDS.
I want to know why it takes 5 to 10 years in this country to test drugs that you can test in Europe in a third of the time. We are simply asking the FDA to do it quicker.
For the first time today, the government approved prescription sales of a drug to treat AIDS.
AZT is not a cure. AZT only seems to extend life for an average 9 months.
The government wasn't responding appropriately or with any sense of urgency, so our effort was to put pressure on the government and drug companies to invest more money in research to try to find effective treatment, but also to put pressure on the media to try to spread as much information as possible.
Members of the AIDS awareness group ACT UP, doing what they do best, getting into trouble and getting attention.
A quilt made by Americans across the country was unfurled.
One of the most memorable actions that we did was the first political funeral, the Ashes actions at the White House.
We're here today because we're tired of this administration, and we're going to take the ashes of some of our friends and drop them on the steps of the White House. Every day somebody is dying, every few minutes.
We thought we were going to have about 8 people's ashes, but when we publicized where the meeting place was, and another 8 people showed up, including a grandmother from the Midwest who got on a bus and traveled across the country to bring her grandson's ashes so they could be dumped on the White House lawn because she was so infuriated that nothing was done to save her grandson's life. When we marched through the edge of the quilt, we started chanting out of the quilt and into the streets, join us, join us. And people just started pouring out of the quilt to join our procession.
The Scientific Advisory Panel has recommended that the Food and Drug Administration approve a new drug called the most important advance since AZT.
New York, which has the highest number of AIDS patients in the country, has shown a dramatic decrease in the number of AIDS deaths, a 30% drop.
Distinguished guests, I'm going to be very blunt. I'm here to sound a wake-up call to everyone attending this conference. I'm afraid that you will all miss the real message from this conference.
When I started finding out that people in the developing world had no access whatsoever to even drugs to treat opportunistic infections like AIDS fungal infections, I became really outraged.
Are you listening yet? The headline that PWAs want you to write from this conference would read, "Human rights violations and genocide continue to kill millions of impoverished people with AIDS." That's the truth. Free kills, access for all. Free kills, access for all. Free kills, access for
all. My activism both was targeted towards UNAIDS to make it do the right thing, but also working with UNAIDS to help them develop the policies and procedure to do the right thing. And I was eventually asked by UNAIDS to come and work for them, to be a liaison to not only the activist world, but to non-governmental organizations in general.
Were born before the advent of HIV. I stand here before you as a gay man who has been living with HIV since the beginning of the epidemic in 1981. As a gay man,
I don't know why I got to survive for more than 3 decades with a fatal illness when so many of my friends and loved ones died. I feel a responsibility to fight as hard as I can to expand that access to what has kept me alive.
The red ribbon that many of us are wearing today symbolizes our support for people living with HIV and pays tributes to the more than 35 million people who have died of AIDS since the beginning of the epidemic.
As long as there are still tens of millions of people living without access to treatment, I'm going to continue to use my voice to try to draw attention to the lives of people who are dying needlessly around the world still of HIV until everybody has access to treatment and human rights protections and food security and housing and clean water and you know, all of the things that should be a human right for everybody living with HIV.